What is up guys, welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build an $800 gaming PC build for 2020, as well as running you through all the parts I selected and why. I'm going to build it step by step with close-ups of the little cables and fiddly screws before booting it up so we can see exactly how it performs in some of the most popular titles. Without any further ado though, let's jump into it. I'm going to kick things off as always with our CPU, our RAM, and our motherboard. And a big shout out to Gigabyte, who wanted to sponsor today's build and get me to talk about ray tracing a bit later. They also kindly sent over this motherboard. Specifically, this is their B450M S2H, and as well as supporting the current Ryzen 3000 chips, AMD have also announced that this will continue to support the next gen CPUs, so no need to hold out for B550 if you don't want to. Crucially, it also supports our CPU choice for today, which is the Ryzen 3 3300X. The Ryzen 5 is a good bet if you want to do a bit of video editing or productivity, but for gaming only, this is a great value option. Pull back the arm on our CPU socket and then line up the triangle on our CPU with the corresponding one on our motherboard socket. Then it's a case of dropping the CPU into place and it just literally falls in. There's no need to apply any pressure or any force. Next up is our memory or our RAM. I went for a 16GB kit of Kingston HyperX RGB. It doesn't really cost any more than non-RGB memory, and with a 3000 MHz speed is pretty quick and more than good enough for today's build. Installing your RAM's easy. Pull back the clips at either end of your DIMM slot and line the notch on the memory with the notch on your motherboard. It's then a case of clipping the RAM into place with even pressure on both sides and repeating for as many RAM DIMMs as you've got. That was easy. We're next going to move our motherboard assembly over into our case, and this is Cooler Master's brand new MB320L ARGB. What a name. I'm actually going to hazard a guess that this may be the best value case on the market right now. It's got addressable RGB fans up front and a real tempered glass side panel. The next thing you want to do with any case is come down and grab this, which is our bag of included screws that we need to install our motherboard. We next up need to take this I/O shield, which is the metal plate that comes with your motherboard and clicks into the back of our case. You literally push it in corner by corner, and for anybody wondering, your circular audio and your Ethernet port should be located at the bottom. We next need to make sure that our case has got the right standoffs installed. To do this, you need to look at your motherboard and find each of the different holes. Then it's a case of sliding the motherboard in, slotting it through your I/O shield, and one of the standoffs here is actually slightly taller, so it will keep our motherboard in place. I should mention these are the screws we're using to install it, which are the same we'll use for our power supply in a moment's time. Okay then, with our motherboard installed, the next component we're going to pop in is our CPU cooler, which is Cooler Master's Hyper 212 RGB. I think you're going to be set. You are going to need to use your manual, which isn't actually going to be too complicated. Take the plastic backplate first off, alongside this set of plastic retainers, and we want the wider ones as opposed to the narrow ones. We're going to use these retainers to secure down these kind of screws through the back of our backplate. With that having been done, we're next going to remove the default stock plastic brackets on the motherboard before slotting the new backplate through the holes that are now discovered and using these kind of female to female screws. This is essentially what our CPU cooler is going to bolt into in a moment's time. We then finally, and I promise we're nearly there, bolt on these two brackets to our cooler before bolting that onto our motherboard. With a little bit of thermal paste then popped on, that's more than enough, we can pretty simply fasten it into place. With the longest step of our build complete, we're going to do a couple of cables now while we've still got room and everything's easy to access. The first is our HD audio cable. It's got a pin missing and plugs into the bottom left of your motherboard, so we'll only go in one way round. USB 3 is fairly similar. It's keyed, which means it will only go in one way, and this goes kind of to the bottom right of our motherboard. Next to our USB 3 connector are our front panel headers. This is our power, reset, hard drive LED, all that kind of stuff. As you can see on your screen now, it's a bit fiddly, but I've put a diagram which will make it easier to follow. If you get this wrong, don't worry, the system's not going to explode. You'll just have to kind of start over again. With all of that wrapped up, we're next going to install our storage and our power supply. For the storage, Kingston's A400 SSD is a great bet. It's a budget-oriented drive that's still going to be way quicker than any hard drive option. For the power supply, I've gone for Cooler Master's MWE 650 Gold. It's a tiny bit overkill for this build, but you want to go for a power supply that's efficient and from a reputable manufacturer, and this ticks all the boxes. The SSD mount in this case is actually really clever. You want to take these 4 rubber grommets and pop these through these 4 holes on our motherboard like so. Then take these 4 tiny screws and pop these into the bottom of our SSD before plugging up a SATA cable, which comes included in our motherboard's box, and slide in the drive through the 4 rubber grommets we popped in a moment ago. We're then going to take our power supply out of the box, alongside our fat motherboard 24-pin power connector, a dual 6+2 pin GPU power cable, a SATA power connector, and our 4+4 pin CPU power connector. With these plugged up to our power supply, we're then going to slide our power supply into the case and secure it in these 4 holes at the back of the chassis. With that in place, we're going to run our 4+4 pin CPU power cable to the top left of our motherboard, as well as our super fat motherboard power cable to the right hand side of our motherboard. Just like so. That then leaves us to finally install our graphics card, and for this, I went for the Gigabyte Windforce OC RTX 2060. Now, this is actually the cheapest 2060 on the market right now, and while prices can change, it indicates that it's a really, really great value card and will look great in our system. Installing our graphics card's pretty simple. We need to roughly line it up with the black slot on our motherboard, which will tell us which of these PCIe covers need removing. In this case, it's the second and third ones, which make way for us to slide our graphics card into place and secure it down with these screws. Finally, we want to run a 6+2 pin power connector up to our graphics card before finally plugging up our RGB fans. And then we're ready to boot the machine up. Doing this is really pretty simple. You just need to take the female end from the pre-plugged in fan splitter, as well as the controller that comes with your case. Then slide the splitter into the controller and plug up the end to a SATA power cable. Repeat exactly the same process for our CPU cooler fan cable, and we're quite literally off to the races. Without any further ado though, let's get this machine booted up and see how it looks, but more importantly, how it performs. Okay then, now that you've seen just how good this system looks and kind of how easy it is actually to put it together step by step, let's dive in and see exactly how it performs. I've tested a range of games from those with ray tracing to those without, and also those with DLSS 2.0 and those without, but hang tight for that. The first game was Apex Legends, 1440p high settings. You're looking in the region of 90 to 120 frames per second. If you wanted 150, 160 FPS, then drop down to 1080p at medium, but I think 1440p high is a great middle ground. It's a similar story in Forza Horizon 4. It automatically selected the Ultra preset at 1440p, and that gave us a solid 105 FPS in the inbuilt benchmarking mode. The next game I tried out today was Control. It's one of the RTX titles, but crucially one that supports DLSS 2.0. Nvidia and Gigabyte reached out and went, James, have a look at DLSS 2.0. So I did, and honestly my mind's kind of blown. Basically what it does is it renders the game out with your graphics card at a lower resolution than your native screen resolution, and then upscales it to your screen or desired resolution using AI. Now I know that all sounds a little bit ambiguous, but it's actually kind of bonkers, because it means you get the frame rate of a lower resolution, so the frame rate of 1080 or 1440p, but with the actual visual quality that you'd find with something like 4K. To really showcase this, I'm going to run the same scene twice, one with DLSS off first of all, so we've got a display resolution of 1440p and the game is rendered at just that 1440p, and then let's now turn DLSS on. So the screen resolution's 1440p and the image is of 1440p quality, but it's being rendered out at a lower resolution and upscaled using that AI tech. And the difference really visually is not much, but the frame rate is dramatic. The other ray tracing compatible game I tested was Battlefield 5, and here at 1440p medium settings with RTX enabled, we're looking around about 70 FPS, despite EA's really crappy frame rate counter. The game is super duper immersive with ray tracing enabled, especially because of the realism of the shots with the sparks and sort of realistic fire with grenades and that kind of thing. It's a very reflection heavy game, which makes it well suited really to RTX. The next game on my list today is arguably the most popular battle royale, if not most popular game about right now. Call of Duty's Warzone. At 1440p medium to high settings, you're looking in the region of 70 to 80 frames per second, which is a really playable experience for me. But James, you cry, what about 1080p? I know you lot like to know, for most people, what kind of frame rates can you get? Well, 100 to 120 frames per second at 1080p medium to high settings gives you an almost kind of esports level experience on an $800 machine, while still having medium to high visual settings. The next game today is CSGO. I know it's an easier game to run, but people always ask for it. 1440p, very high settings, wait for it, 270-ish frames per second. Next up is GTA 5 at 85 to 90 FPS in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode, pretty consistently at 1440p high settings, with some of our render distance, bars and our kind of anti-aliasing toned down a little bit. GTA 5, my word of advice is have a play with all the settings, because one or two will really hammer your frame rate, and that it's all about balance, I think. Next up is Overwatch, 70 FPS pinned at 1440p high settings. The game looks great, super fun, super enjoyable, really overall fantastic gaming experience. The final game today is Project Cars 2, here at 1440p high settings. We're looking in the region of 190 frames per second. It's just, that number is just completely ridiculous at 1440p for an $800 gaming PC build. Speaking of which, that pretty much wraps it up for today's video. If you did enjoy it, you know what to do. Give it a big old like rating and make sure to get subscribed. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next GeekaWhat video.